It is 6:02 p.m. Thursday, November 21st. I'm going to call the meeting of Station Area Task Force to order. And first order of business is roll call. Send this to staff.
Thank you. All right, Member Mariano,
Present.
Member Collins,
Present.
Member Evans,
Present.
Member Ganesh,
Present.
Member Hashimoto,
Here.
Member Huff, Member Leung,
Here.
Member Mayor,
Here.
Member Ondrasek,
Present.
Member Plain,
Present.
and Member Stockwell is absent.
Thank you. Is there a motion to excuse Member Stockwell from the meeting?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who is the second? I do. Member Ganesh. So motion Hashimoto, second Ganesh on the excuse from absence. Those who are in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, oppose? Abstain? None? Unanimous one absence for excusing Member Stockwell from the absence. Next item is declaration of Station Area Task Force procedures. Staff, please, the meeting procedures in the record.
Thank you. Staff meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the SATF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and any staff reports for each item on the agenda are available online on the Station Area Specific Plan website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. Chair?
Thank you. The next item we have is the consent calendar. Generally, this is a group of items that we approve as a group. The only item we have on here now is the meeting minutes for October 17th. Just so you know, if you weren't here, you can vote abstain on the item if you like. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar, or if there's any comment correction on the minutes? Is that you, Dan? Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion Ondrasek, second Evans on the consent calendar. Those who are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain. Member Hall, Member Plain, Member Mayor, well, Member Marinaro, abstain. Cool. I think that was enough votes. Yes. The next item we have is general business, moving to general business. So I'm going to send this over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. So the item for discussion tonight is the economic analysis that was prepared for the project. It was attached to the staff report, so, well, the agenda. So hopefully you all had a chance to review it. We do have the consultant that prepared the analysis, Dina Belzer, online, as well as WRT. So if okay with the chair, I'll turn it over to Dina. She will give a presentation on the report.
Thank you and welcome, team. I see Jim on the attendees instead panel.
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Welcome.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, and I tried to keep this presentation to 20 minutes plus or minus, but it's long. But I encourage you all to interrupt and ask questions. I'm hoping we can have a dialogue here, and that will make the content, I think, easier to follow, perhaps. So with that, I'm going to share, and And then I'm going to, let's see, screen. Can you all see my screen in full mode?
Not yet.
Not full yet.
There.
Flash
uh,
drive for a
Presentation mode
second.
yet.
Yeah, it's in a window. There's not.
It's, let's see, hang on. I'm gonna do this one more time.
In the bottom right of the screen, the just up from that and oh, there you go.
Okay. There we go. Okay, can you all see my screen now?
Yep, looking
Yes,
good.
looks great.
Yes, okay, it's a little hard to hear you, so I'm hoping I can see Deeksha, so she'll give me the thumbs up if I'm missing anything. Okay, again, I'm Dina Belzer, Principal with Strategic Economics, and I'm sitting right this minute in Berkeley, California, so I'm close at hand, but obviously not present in the room. Tonight, I want to go over 5 big areas with you. First of all, the report purpose and our market area geographies. These are important to understand in terms of the discussion and findings from the report. I'll go over the demographic and business and employment growth trends and conditions. We'll talk about the real estate market trends, which I think is of considerable interest to people. Items 2 and 3 are very interrelated. And then staff asked us in our scope of work to look at 4 additional economic factors just to sort of understand how they might play out, I guess is a way to put it, in response to what goes on in the station area. And then I'm going to close with some big picture considerations. These are sort of reflections that I had as I went through the report myself to pull together this presentation and just share with you kind of what I walked away with. So first of all, the report purpose and market area geographies. We want to create a clear understanding of the past trends and the current challenges and future opportunities that are facing the station area. We want to really think about what the benefits are to the city of redeveloping the station area. And we want to help Santa Clara to move towards becoming a more inclusive community. So with that, I want to situate the station area here. I think you all are very familiar. Can you see my cursor if I do this? No? How about this? Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the station area. I think you all know where it is, right adjacent to the airport. This yellowish is the city boundary. And then this much bigger purple area is what we're referring to as the market area. And this bigger area is what we consider the area that the station area is competing with in terms of understanding supply and demand. It's sort of the region in which you're operating. It's also the area from which you might be facing competition and which you might draw demand over time. And we thought about this pretty closely in terms of looking at where there was similar development. Again, there's not another station area. We don't think that really is similar to the Santa Clara station, except maybe Diridon right down here. So we were really focused on this bigger geography because we really wanted to know what was going on there and how that would reflect on what's happening in the station area. Then we also subdivided the station area into these 5 sub areas. So this is sub area 1 north of Coleman Avenue. So this is where most of the older industrial space sits. Then there's sub area 2, which is south of Coleman and west of Brokaw. And this is where the Apple kind of R&D facility is, but also where Costco is, and then a little bit more of the retail area. There's sub area 3, which is south of Coleman and east of Brokaw. And this is really where you're seeing some of the most interesting transformation in the construction of the Gateway project over here, which we think is really responding more to the Coleman Avenue corridor that is in San Jose. So that's interesting. Then we have sub-area 4, and sub-area 4 is important because among other things, it has all this older office space in it, but the office space is actually housing some interesting industries and business types. And then finally, the south of El Camino Real, which is the area that I would say is the most affected by and sort of part of what is the offshoot of the Santa Clara University campus. So a lot of the analysis in the report is presented not just for the station area, but by the sub area as well. I didn't get into that much detail in the presentation, but you can always refer back to the report if we want to discuss any of those findings. So on the demographic and business and employment growth trends, just to summarize at a very high level, what we see is that the larger market area is experiencing strong population growth. It's seeing a decrease in housing sizes. We're seeing an increase in non-family households, and we're seeing increases in rapid growth in households that are made up of young adults, like our friends over here in the picture on the right. The station area itself has only added a small increment of new population, but the area's new household characteristics actually match those in the market area. And so what this shows is that as the larger market area continues to grow and expand, the station area is reflecting that, and that suggests that this demand is also well matched to transit-oriented communities. So these are strong signs that the station area is likely to be a competitive location within the larger market area. Then despite growing demand for housing, households in the station area have lower incomes, and they pay a larger share of their income for housing than similar households in the market, suggesting that permanently affordable housing will be important. One of the sort of interesting differentiator for the station area is the Santa Clara University and the students there. So to some extent that skews some of these findings, but I think overall it's not necessarily a bad thing to think about the need for permanently affordable housing. And we will come back to that later on in the discussion because this is, again, reflects on the community's desire to be a more inclusive place. So in terms of business and station area trends, let's see, to get rid of this so I can see my notes. There you go. There are 4 main sectors that make up about 80% of total employment. Manufacturing is the main employer here. It's a small part of the 6 cities. It's only about 3% of the city's total manufacturing employment. But in terms of employment in the station area right now, manufacturing dominates. Educational services, of course, dominate. This is all related to, again, Santa Clara University. Costco is reflected in the fact that retail is a large employer. And finally, last but not least, we have about 300 people who are working in the professional, scientific, and technical services. So these are kind of what we think of as the knowledge-based industries, software, engineering, various kinds of design, project management. These are all the kinds of things that we're hoping that would be occupants of the station in the station area in the future. So to see that even though as a percent of total employment, it's small, much smaller than manufacturing is today, these 2 sectors are also in office space in the station area. There's some of the businesses that are categorized as manufacturing are actually occupying office space, not industrial space. So I put the I here to remind us that this is a sector to watch. So
Is it okay to ask a question?
yes, please.
That's okay. I think that educational services number is really low.
Uh-huh,
No, just at Santa Clara U, where I work, we have over 1,500 employees.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, then this would be, this picture would change, but you would see that manufacturing and ed services.
I wonder if that's due to the fact that the university actually falls outside of the actual station area study
Yes, I
boundary.
think that's right. Thank you for reminding me. But even so, they represent about 1,000 employees in the station area, so it's still a significant number. And the station area is not that big, so when you look at 500 employees, you might think, oh, well, that's not that many, but in a small area, it's a significant component. And then again, this is retail, so Costco, we don't know exactly how many jobs Costco has on site, but and they're obviously not the only retailer in the area, but they are big. And then again, we want to keep a watchful eye on these PSTS industries. Any other questions about this? So another question that you asked us to take a look at is business size. And again, we will come back to this at the end of the presentation, but it is interesting to see that small businesses make up 96% of businesses in the station area, but they only account for 31% of total employment. So these small businesses are primarily concentrated in that PSTS, that professional, scientific, and technical services, and then in retail and manufacturing. So we see those industry sectors, the ones that have the big jobs. Well, some of those jobs are in big businesses, but a lot of them are also in small businesses. And what you can see here is that there are only 5 businesses that are bigger than 100 employees, but they comprise 60% of the total employees in the station area. So it's Apple and a couple of other of these tech firms, right? And then there are a lot of these little guys. So the key implications for the demographic and industry trends are primarily that the station area is likely in the early phases of a transition away from what has been its traditional role. And I would argue that it's sort of part of a cluster. If you look at an aerial photograph of the station area and you look to the north and to the west, you see that it's really part of what is a long-standing light manufacturing, light industrial area that is in Santa Clara and then extends up into San Jose and across into neighboring cities. But the role as an employment area is in flux as you're starting to add more housing units, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Population and household growth in the area does favor the kind of dense housing that's typically associated with transit-oriented development. And the industries that are likely to drive future demand for office or perhaps R&D space in the station area include, are likely to include the PSTS sectors that are already driving employment growth in the South Bay, but not so much the life science sectors that have fueled growth in San Mateo County. That's one of the questions that we were asked at the beginning of this study is, how much of this demand, how much future demand do you think will be in life science sectors? And given what we're seeing in the PSTS sectors here, and what we're seeing generally in the South Bay, I would say that life science is probably going to stay focused up in San Mateo County, and that what you're likely to see more is the sweet spot that has been more Silicon Valley's strengths. And not that life sciences and the professional, technical, and scientific aren't merging, but sometimes they have different kinds of space and building demands. So that's why we chose to stick with focusing on the PSTS and not transitioning over to a life science definition. By the way, if we wanted to talk about life sciences, we would have to dig down and recombine a whole series of NAICS codes, which we have done multiple times for cities in the East Bay. But given, again, the composition of the South Bay economy, it did not seem worth that level of effort for this because none of these types of businesses appear to be present today. Also, as the station area evolves, Santa Clara could use space that is currently incubating small businesses. So again, the fact that the PSTS businesses are there, they're in small industrial spaces, they're in those small low-priced office spaces that we'll talk about again as I go through the real estate market trends. This is something that would change, but it wouldn't change, it could change over time. It could change slowly. It's just sort of one of those facts of life. Any questions about this? I'm sorry, there's some garbled text in this third bar down here, but I think you all get the point. Any questions about this before I move on?
So on the previous slide, you mentioned there's 5 employers that are greater than 100 employees. What are the 5? Costco's probably one, but what are the other?
Yeah, I have them in the detailed report. It's a couple of other manufacturing businesses, actually, and Apple is one of them. Okay, moving on to real estate. We looked at 5 market segments: multifamily, retail, office, industrial, and hotel. And for the multifamily, this chart just shows multifamily units that were built between 2003 and 2023. So this is a 20-year trend. So you can see kind of the ups and downs of construction activity. The gray is the station area, and I've circled 2021 because that's when the gray bar really pops up. This is the Benson. That when it came online, and there was another project that came online in 2006, but not much otherwise has happened in the station area. But you can see that there was a lot of production coming out. So this was the run up in the kind of the .com, the bubble, the housing bubble that followed the .com bust. And then we have the Great Recession. And then we're slowly building up out of that. And you can see that housing production had already peaked in 2018. And we're starting to cool off in 2020. Was still going pretty strong in 2020, 2021. And in 2022, there was a big spike. And then this, again, falling off the cliff. And a lot of this is very common for what's going on all over the country. I'm sure you all are familiar with a lot of the issues around interest rates, inflation, a lot of uncertainty, even though the economy overall is doing well and there's been a lot of employment growth, it's been really hard to access the capital markets to be able to get the money to build these projects. It's just been too expensive. So if interest rates modulate, which is becoming questionable, they may stay where they are for a while now, or they may drop some. We could either see these bars go up. But I think it's important to understand that there are 3 projects that are already in the pipeline for the station area that by 2025, 26 are expected to add over 2,000 units. So the station area's current multifamily supply is significant, and this is what is really starting to reposition, if you will, the station area into a different kind of place than what it has been historically. When you drill down into the numbers and look at the data more closely, you see that a lot of this demand that has come online, and particularly for where the Benson is located, looks like demand for student housing, which is currently shaping housing markets in several places, like Berkeley, where I am, also has seen a big construction boom, mostly because students are needing places to live. But the Gateway Crossing project is well situated to extend this demand base beyond students because it's not adjacent to the university. And it's not necessarily close to the campus. So I would argue that this is really there to be proximate to the Caltrain station, to the future BART station, and to a lot of the jobs that are being created in, or are situated in North San Jose. the thing that's good about the performance of housing in the station area is that rents are higher and vacancy rates are lower than the city and the market area. So this is a very good proof of concept, if you will, for future developers who will be looking at this area and wanting to go to their lenders and charge the rents that would be required to pay for the construction costs that they need and make the return that they need on their capital. It will be easier to do that with these 3 projects online because you'll have comparables, assuming they all perform, continue to perform on trend.
Hey,
Quick question
Dina,
on the,
Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
on this, is this built over destroyed? Because I see some negative values on there as well as kind of conflicting.
Yeah, you know, what sometimes happens is units get demolished in a recessionary period like this. And so I think that may be what's happening, is that there was just a slight decrease in the number of units. And, you know, sometimes these numbers seem very precise, but they're approximate. So it's good to sort of eyeball some of this. But I think that the reflected big picture trends are correct.
hey, Dina, do you have a sense for Gateway Crossings, if that's sort of continuing in this trend of smaller unit, younger worker trend that you described before?
That's my take. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, they're building in their amenities. They are, the way that they've designed the project is that it's internally facing, it's not facing out to the street. So it's there to create an overall quality of life. Even the amount of amenity retail that they have also is inward facing. So in a sense, they're trying to create their own little neighborhood just with that project. So that suggests for young people. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so does this graph show the year in which those units were completed, or is it the year in which the units broke ground?
I'm sorry, your audio is really fuzzy, so perhaps someone else can repeat the question.
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
Try it again.
Yeah. So does this graph show when those units finished construction or when they broke ground?
I'm sorry, I still can't understand.
Is the date when they broke ground or when they delivered the units, Dina?
Oh, great question. Yeah, when they delivered the units.
Yeah, and do you know like how many units are currently in the pipeline, like within Santa Clara or the station area?
In the station area, there are over 2,000 units in the pipeline. That's what's under construction now. And I don't believe we have all those pipeline numbers in the report. They're particularly for the market area, they are difficult to round up. Every city has its own way of tracking those pipeline projects. This data that you're looking at here all comes from one data source, so it's easy to pull it together and display it like this. But the pipeline projects are harder to round up. Any other questions? Nope, then we'll go on to what I like to call the measles map. This is looking at the retail market, and the retail industry works in what they call trade areas. And usually they think in 1 mile, 3 mile, and 5 mile trade areas. And depending on how frequently you go to a store, like when you go to the grocery store 2 or 3 times a week, because you're there so many times, one customer shops 3 times. But if you're going to go to Target, which is like located, I believe here, oops, I'm pointing to the wrong map. Target, which is located here, you may only go there once a week, so you have fewer trips. So in order to capture the same number of trips, you need 3 times the people going there. So you need a bigger trade area that you're pulling off of. So the community centers typically pull from the neighborhood centers. The green dot on here are typically anchored by a grocery store. The community centers are typically anchored by a big box store like a Target or a Home Depot or something like that. And they serve a 3-mile trade area, 3 to 5 mile trade area. And then the big regional shopping centers like Valley Fair and Santana Row serve a much bigger trade area. But we just looked at the 1, 3, and 5 mile competitive supply. And here's the station area in purple. And you can see that there are within the 1 mile trade area, there's a community center with a grocery store right here. This is in San Jose, not in Santa Clara, but still there are a bunch of strip centers. There's a neighborhood center here. So this area today, if you're in a car and you can get to one of those places, you're actually pretty well served. What we found is that there has been very little new space added in the station area in the last 10 years, reflecting the fact that the current retail supply, this is for the market area overall, for the 5 mile trade area, very little new supply. Most of it was in the expansion of Valley Fair itself. And what that means is that the current supply of space is more or less keeping up with the rate of growth in demand. So most of the demand is coming not necessarily from adding new households, but from either an increase in incomes and disposable income for those households or demographic shifts. And so that might reflect a change in the mix of stores that one would have in their shopping center, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that you would feel confident about building out a big new center. In the station area, Costco represents a significant part, not only of the station area's retail inventory, but a significant part of the city's retail inventory. So that Costco actually is an important part of the city of Santa Clara's entire retail inventory, as it were. Other retail activity other than Costco is on Coleman Avenue, to a lesser extent on Brokaw. Coleman is kind of the main arterial going through the study area. And so there are a lot of, fast food and other kinds of restaurants and small business activities. There's also a lot of auto repair and service kind of activity, again, representing this kind of an older industrial area that is providing services to the residents of the city, not just to other businesses. And then finally, there is a little bit of new retail space in the station area. And kind of a signal that bodes well for the market is that the asking rents are very high. But on the downside, the vacancy rates are high. However, again, we just saw the one new building come online, and it could be that these high vacancy rates reflect kind of a dynamic vacancy that will decrease over time. That space will just slowly fill in. And the other thing that's interesting and to keep in mind in terms of thinking about how much retail would or should be added into this station area plan as the plan and the land uses in the plan get solidified, is that even with a lot of high density housing in urban areas, the demand for ground floor retail spaces has not been what the market anticipated over the last decade or so. So you see this in downtown San Jose. You see this in neighborhoods in downtown San Francisco, where there are thousands and thousands of new housing units. And yet, with these smaller households, even with high incomes, people tend not to support the ground floor retail in the way that we think of, where they would fill in with small shops and so forth and so on. So it takes much longer for that space to fill up, and it often fills up with restaurants, other kinds of what we call experiential retail, where it's more about being able to get, or services like a salon or a studio or something like that, than it is about getting a lot of little boutiques or having the shoe repair shop or anything like that, that we associate kind of with historic main streets. So I think that that's going to be an ongoing conversation in the discussion of the plan, and especially when we discuss how to knit together the two sides of the station area. So on the east and west of the tracks, and then merging into the downtown that Santa Clara is trying to create. We want, and we'll kind of talk about that more at the end, but important things to keep in mind here.
So I have a quick question on this one. I get that we're looking at like different retail centers that people can drive to, but taking this as kind of like a TOD area, how would we view like the supply that we want to put into place differently? Because with TOD, where the goal is to have people not drive as much, like to those retail centers. Yeah.
No, that's a great question, and a great point. And again, we would hope that you could attract some kind of a small format grocery store. But don't forget, you have Costco right here. Now, Costco is not always the best place to grocery shop for small households. And we all know that you buy at Costco in volume, but still it makes it harder potentially for a small store to come in. So you may be looking at something like a small Whole Foods. Again, there's one of these in Oakland that has the whole front part of the store is positioned with containers that are essentially lock boxes. And so people order their groceries online from the apartment building upstairs. And then when they're ready to come down and pick up their groceries, they just go to their lockbox. So they're not even going into the store. And I've spoken to a lot of developers across the country who are looking more and more at these kinds of partnerships with grocery stores in particular, where they're putting in these essentially storage facilities. It's almost like a mailbox in the ground floor of these large apartment complexes. And then your Instacart or even the store itself can deliver the groceries. And then they're there when the person comes home and is ready to pick up their goods. So again, I think that how demand for retail space is going to play out in the future, given these shifts in the retail industry, suggests that you could continue to have a walkable space without having a grocery store and without having to have a car to get to a grocery store. So, yeah. So again, I think that what we can expect in terms of the retail experience here may not be what we would have imagined for a traditional main street, like a Willow Glen or something like that. Those places are becoming more artifacts than they are analogs for what we can expect to see in new places that are developing.
So I have a question about that. I often hear that small businesses, that the rents are too high, especially in these new complexes. So even though they would love to move in, they can't afford the rent. And so I'm trying to understand like how to understand like the cost of rent for small businesses versus that there's demand. Because it seems like there's demand. It's just that the cost is very high often in
Right.
these places. And so it seems like there's the kind of a catch-22 there. People are raising rents and pushing people out potentially more
Right.
than.
Yeah. Well, that's another really great question. And it really has to do with the capital markets and the way these large apartment complexes are financed. So when you go to your lenders, to your equity investors who are also a lender, but a different kind of lender, and they're looking for a certain kind of financial return off their capital, they can pretty much insist that you charge, in order to meet your performance, your pro forma numbers, you have to charge those rents. And then you want what they call a national credit tenant. So that is a tenant with a very solid track record who can afford those higher rents. Because even though that particular outlet for that store might not be meeting, might underperform at points, they can be subsidized essentially or assisted by the corporate entity. But that's not always the case with the small mom and pop businesses. So there are developers who get this and they do things to help local businesses come into their buildings. I've seen developers do that in San Francisco, but most developers who are building at the scale we're looking at here of medium to high density are not necessarily so interested in doing that. Now, one thing I've seen from some of these big mall redevelopments around the country is that developers are doing, they're creating these sort of small provisional single story or even more pop-up-y kind of retail nodes. You saw that for a while in Hayes Valley in San Francisco. There's some of that in the uptown area in Oakland, or in sort of the sort of North Broadway area in Oakland. And the example that I saw a few weeks ago is actually in Huntsville, Alabama, but it's based on a project that's actually in Costa Mesa called The Camp. And it's made up of shipping containers and vans and small funky structures that are supporting local small businesses. And because there's no real construction cost associated with these, the rents can be low. And the developers see this as a kind of a loss leader. So that's something else to keep in mind as this space gets designed, because it could be that the city could say, well, we want a plaza or a space where the camp could be created. Some of these are in Airstream trailers, and it's very cool. That really does relate to this idea of placemaking and community building. The place in Huntsville has really focused around live music and entertainment. And so that's been a really great complement to their small scale retail. So there are concepts out there, but it's not necessarily the traditional, again, ground floor retail, residential above. I don't know if that was a long-winded answer, and I'm not sure it completely got to your question, but the high rents is a challenge, and the big landlords, that's where they're coming from. So it's very hard to change that.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm hearing is like the way the financing and the system works is effectively hollowing out and kind of forcing a lot of small businesses out of these areas, which is unfortunate because it means that we're kind of forcing everybody to go to these regional centers with things like autos, at the same time though telling people, hey, we want you to have walkable neighborhoods you can go to.
Right.
And just the way
Yeah.
development is financed is
Yeah.
creating making the problem worse, or just general property.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that these developers of these mixed use buildings are responsible for hollowing out or for the disappearance of those small mom and pop shops. I would say that there are other trends within the retail industry itself, changing consumer tastes. A lot of the small businesses, and we see this in so many cities where we work in California, where there are specialty retailers, and the number of specialty retailers has declined. So we think of these as the small mom and pops who are doing the boutiques and the gift shops and the card shops, sometimes the bookstores, all of, again, those kinds of places that you want to see on those main streets. And what we've seen, and this is true from Gilroy to Santa Barbara to State Street in Santa Barbara to all kinds of places in between, is that we also see an aging out of a generation of mom and pops. So it was much cheaper and easier to start a small business like that in the 60s or the 70s. And you could really, you know, the middle class families were really supporting those kinds of businesses. And as our incomes become more bifurcated into low or moderate income and then higher incomes, people are more price sensitive. So price sensitive people want to shop in the bigger stores that offer better prices. And then it's the very high end and households that are supporting a lot of these specialty good retailers. And the stuff that's kind of somewhere in between is sort of losing its foothold in the market for a lot of reasons. So, you know.
I also think there's just a delay because some of these projects are being built, but no people actually live there yet. And so for a retailer, like a restaurant, to move in right now is a challenge because there's not a big demand signal yet. And
Right.
I think those will start to marry up over
Yeah.
time.
I think that's true in this area in particular. As I said earlier, I think that lag between when the population moves in, I mean, we looked at this for the East Cut neighborhood in San Francisco. They already had 15,000 people living there, and, you know, like the vast majority of them had incomes of way over $200,000 a year. But they were mostly single young men. And all they wanted was, like, you know, brew pubs and stuff like that. So, you know, how many of those can you get? So over time, East Cut has begun to fill in, but it's taken a long time. It's not like a matter of 2 years or 3 years. It's taken 10 years, 11 years. It's slow. So
I have a
don't let
question.
that daunt you from having your vision, and the vision is important, but we have to balance that out with some of these trends.
Hi, Dina. Thanks for the information thus far. I think this is really interesting. Back to something that you alluded to, I'm curious to touch on it a little bit more. The comment about, like, the downtown Willow Glen prototype is becoming an artifact of sorts. What are some insights you could provide us as to what are the factors that are, you know, working against the ability, in a sense, to recreate something similar to that, recognizing that something like that is, it does lend itself to walkability. It does lend itself to knitting together the station area with the downtown. So in concept, it's appealing, but it doesn't sound, you don't sound very hopeful about it. So
Well,
what are some of the factors that you
Yeah.
think will make that, you know, difficult to achieve?
Yeah, I'm actually one of the most optimistic people that most people know, but because of the industry that I'm in, you know, I'm always trying to sort of temper people's, like, hopes and dreams with some sense of reality. But you ask a really great question, like, okay, well, the market is restructuring and whatever, but we still want to do placemaking here. How do we do that? And I think that's really the conversation going forward. And we've already started to talk to WRT about that. So it also has to do with what your design standards are for the way buildings are designed. It's where you look at where you cluster activity. And so you might not have these long rows of shops going block after block, but you're really focusing around key nodes or key locations. It has to do with where the city also really invests and targets funding and financing towards placemaking. And these are some of my big picture. I'm totally telegraphing to you what my kind of big picture takeaways are, is that I cannot emphasize enough the value of really thoughtful and good design in this process, and then setting standards for quality. About, again, where buildings are situated, how they're positioned, how they face the street, what kinds of openings you have, the cadence of even where the doorways are. All of those things make a huge difference. And so for people who are not really experienced with dealing with these aspects of design and development, I want to really underscore that that the market is very responsive to that, And that's a big differentiator. So again, when you look at this place in Huntsville, Alabama, for example, that it's actually a tear down and remake of a failed mall. And they used branding and identity and something that was not what you'd seen anyplace else in Huntsville, to really create a sense of place. And they just programmed the heck out of it. Downtown Redwood City did this when they built their new City Hall, and they built their plaza and all that kind of, not their plaza, I'm sorry, I'm conflating Mountain View and Redwood City. It's late.
The Courthouse Square.
Yeah, when they did their Courthouse Square, they really programmed it. They made it a really active, vibrant place. So there is a lot that can be done to really help reposition and reshape the market. But if you let those opportunities fragment, if you don't keep your eye on the ball, if you don't keep everything tightly organized and moving forward, these opportunities will slip away. And
Dina,
it's not easy.
is there also, a time dimension in the sense of, you may not come in with the full-on, well-designed, high standards retail as step one. The camp that you mentioned in
Right.
Costa Mesa is just,
Yeah.
it's kind of a scrappy little place.
Yeah, right. Have you been there?
And- No, but I was just looking at it on Google Maps after you
Right.
mentioned it, and
It's
it looks
kind of
really
awesome,
cool.
right?
So is there a, is there a strategy where you have a catalyst that sort of starts to make a there,
Yeah,
and it's fairly scrappy and simple,
yeah.
but then as the development really takes hold
Yeah.
and you get more density,
Yeah.
then you go for
Yeah.
the second wave that's
Yeah.
this, really nicely designed, high quality, et cetera.
Such a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely merit to that. I think in the case of the camp and then in Costa Mesa, but also the one in Huntsville, the private property owner took that on, and they really decided to do that. But I'm working in Phoenix right now, in an area that has again, a dead mall. And the city is very motivated to try to help that property owner figure out how to do this. And it's right at a transit station. It's in Northwest Phoenix. If anybody knows Phoenix, it's the Metro Center. And the city and the developer are really starting to look at how they might be able to partner on some of this and how they might be able to target some of their programs. Like, this goes back to the point about the fact that the city is interested and concerned about small businesses and small business support. So is there a way to pull together something like that here? And I also want to be mindful of the fact that you all are trying to rebuild your own downtown in the same way. And you can't capture lightning in a bottle and try to replicate it all over the place. So again, some strategic thinking about where you might want to try that and where you might want to try something else. And where you might just want to really invest in other kinds of facilities in a project that is in, of all places, downtown Fargo, North Dakota, and was actually funded and developed by our new Secretary of the Interior, Doug Bergman. It has a plaza in front of the building. It's a beautiful hotel and offices. It's a vertical mixed use. So in this tall building, you have all these uses, but the city programs and manages the plaza. And last time I was there, they had an ice skating rink, and people were playing ice hockey at lunch. And then the time before that, when I was there in the springtime, there were a lot of kids who were roller skating and playing in the fountain and stuff like that. So, and even San Jose has done that a little bit with San Pedro Square. So these are some of the opportunities that doing the specific plan gives you the opportunity to think about: where would we do that? How would we do that? Who would be responsible for it? How would we implement that? And there are lots of ways to implement it. So despite my sort of gloom and doom, I still think there are a lot of interesting opportunities if people stay focused.
I had a quick question. My big, well, and comment, big frustration always been live work.
Uh-huh.
And they usually just end up being screened off and people don't, they may be
Right.
working in there, but it was supposed to enhance the street experience, but
Right.
it hasn't. Is there any, the reverse of that where it's, work, live?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any trend? Because I mean,
Yeah.
that goes back to the way most cities had,
Yeah.
people lived above their,
Yeah.
but is in terms of financing and everything, or is it just people are
Yeah.
too transient?
Yeah.
And so they're
Yeah.
stuck and I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
What's
That's
your
also a
just-
great question. You guys are asking such good, interesting questions. I was worried about filling 2 hours, but we could be here talking to each other all night. 'Cause
And
you're
I'll
so-
hit one other thing that and you
Yeah.
can answer both is
Yeah.
the trend is, with Gateway Crossings and all these apartment complexes, they're dialing them in. I mean, they've got amenities galore and when we
Right.
were pushing against them a little
Right,
bit,
yeah,
saying, why don't you not put swimming pools in every apartment complex
Yeah,
and then
right.
leave some space for a community pool
Yeah.
where you can have swim
Yeah.
team, so there's more of a benefit to the community in bringing everybody together
yeah,
than staying at a resort. Right?
yeah,
And so
No,
these
I-
are some
yeah.
forces that are,
Yeah.
I think, they
yeah,
help get the housing in there and they're getting top dollar,
yeah.
but it's also hurting the sense of community in
Right,
some ways.
yeah.
So,
No, I agree with that as well. And I know that the developers in the Tasman East area band together to work out how they were going to do the parks and open space for their area because they knew it would create more value. And we did the upfront market work on that, but we weren't involved in all those conversations that the developers had with each other. But in these areas where you have multiple property owners, getting those developers together and agreeing on some kind of a plan or a strategy, and then building out a system for delivering it. Now, in the Tasman East area, they wanted to do it themselves and they worked out the money among themselves. But you could create some kind of a benefit assessment district, and then you literally tax everybody, make them pay into it, and then the city provides the public facilities. So there are different ways to make this happen. I think, again, one of the biggest challenges with this area is that it's so fragmented and it's broken up by the train tracks. And then you have Santa Clara University as sort of the dominant employer on one side and kind of one demographic. And then what the other side is going to be is still sort of a big question mark, right? So I think that there's a lot of thinking, and you all are lucky to have WRT on the case because they're great at thinking through this kind of stuff. But I think that will be an important aspect of this specific plan, would be to sort of work with those property owners and try to engage in a dialogue about what kinds of early investments the city could make to make these projects feel like they're lowering their risk of attracting tenants by not internalizing all of those amenities. Because as I said earlier, the Gateway Crossings, even the way it's designed, and when we were talking early on about like, whoa, what should the retail corridor be? And I was like, well, that's easy. It should be right along Brokaw between Coleman and the railroad tracks like that. And then bam, their retail is all facing internally. It's not facing the street. It's not thinking about how that sort of connective tissue is going to happen there. Well, that doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means it has to be done in a different way and might require more on the placemaking and less on the sort of retail as the animator there.
But one of the things on Gateway Crossing, because I was heavily involved as a citizen, was that they're playing off of the BART station. So originally,
Exactly.
the main, it's like Santana Row. That's basically, we tried to get a linear park where you could do pop-ups, and then most of the retail was centered on that, we'll call it a main street, and centered on the BART station, right? Because Brokaw doesn't go all the way through. Although it's gonna loop through across the BART station, but yeah, it is inward thinking, but Coleman's a big street, right? And so they were trying to be more intimate and quiet. And
Right.
like you said, it's supposed to be, well, our push was to make it an urban village. you know,
Right,
But
yeah.
it's 1,500 apartments and 45,000 in retail. It's
Right.
better than the 15,000 that was originally going to be
Yeah.
approved. So
Yeah.
it's at least trending in a good
in the right
direction.
Direction, yeah, it kind of is what it is. So we have to take the good and figure out how to amplify and synergize as opposed to like let each piece fall away as like, okay, that's a failure. No, we have to figure out how to incorporate every piece. But to answer the question about the live work, which is a personal pet peeve of mine as well, is that it's not a very durable product type. And as you say, it doesn't really create a retail or shopfront animator. And what a lot of designers are doing now is actually putting lower rise, like almost townhouse units with stoops facing these bigger, on the front essentially of these bigger tall buildings. So they're kind of bringing a little bit more of that brownstone vibe to the street. And so people are going in and out of their house. They could sit on the stoop if the weather is nice. And so that's sort of a different conception of neighborhood, but also an important third space, if you will. So I think that's kind of a little bit what the design world is trying out now. And again, this is a kind of a ongoing city making process that we keep experimenting with. But I think, again, looking for durable building types that contribute to a sense of community and place is important, as opposed to trying things that are kind of sketchy, like the live work concept was very untried.
And kind of what we did in the downtown with WRT is a lot of it's retail ready, but it's residential right now, but it has the setbacks for if it becomes, whatever, a wine shop or something.
Right.
So it can really play both worlds
Right,
when
yeah.
the time comes. So that's just more for everybody
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
That's a positive that you focus on your main street for retail that you think could have some viability now, but then on the offshoots as it grows, you have the spaces with, the ground floor spaces, taller ceilings for more, if it becomes retail or, what did you call it? Experiential establishments.
Right.
That can evolve over time. If you do low plate heights, then you're not gonna, who's gonna want to have a bar and an 8-foot ceiling of it. So just for the rest of you, that's why I always say, if you look at our downtown precise plan, it's everything she's saying in terms of the storefronts and how WRT, we work with them to make it flexible.
Right, yeah.
For now and the future.
Yeah, well, that's even a slightly different variation on what I was saying, which is you're actually just building housing units on the street, as opposed to even making space that's going to be ready at some point in the future for retail. So those are two different but potentially complementary strategies. But they're better than that sort of live work thing.
Dina, this is
Yeah.
Ray Hashimoto. I agree with you about, I think the most successful kind of mixed use project I've seen has been under one ownership.
Yes.
You have fragmentation, so difficult. That's why I think downtown's can be difficult, because there's small parcels with different owners.
Yeah.
When you look at the model that Irvine did in Santa Clara Square, and I don't see a ton of vacancy there. Their kind of main street they have, and they also obviously have a Whole Foods and everything there, and they have 1,800 apartments. Don't you think that we're just going to have to look at our plan and the ownership pattern and really look at these large property owners like Apple and like the commercial center that's just to the east of them as being the opportunity to provide something that's going to resemble some sort of village.
Yeah.
I don't see what we do it where there's fragmented ownership.
No, right. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. Unless one developer, and we see an example of this in downtown Berkeley. Now, this is at the corner, for those of you who know Berkeley, at the corner of University and Shattuck, where the McDonald's is or used to be. There are 5 or 6 small property owners there, and they've all optioned their land to a single developer, and then they're coming in and building a 20-story high-rise. So if the developer sees value, then they can work with those small property owners. But other than that, that assemblage activity is very challenging. So I agree, but that's where the city could be strategic about this in terms of, again, where you want to create these gathering spaces, or just focal points, where you could do these kinds of things. And for the Phoenix project, the urban designers there programmed in a shed kind of building. So it's a inexpensive single-story building that is not hard to build, and it lends itself more to small tenants who can come in and populate. So that's even more on the sort of market hall kind of concept, or so, you know, maybe there's a place for that in here too, but it's not incorporated into the building. It's something that sits in front of the building, potentially on an open space. So that's another concept.
I wanted to add, the only thing I have an issue, I mean, I agree with Ray that a single developer, prop owner is easier. The problem I have with that, and it's the gateway crossings, is that the architecture generally is sort of homogeneous.
Right.
Unless you really push, you know, I'd rather, I mean, what we try to do is push it to look more like it was developed at different times, and less, you know, massive.
Right.
As if it evolved with individual buildings that are vertical versus this mono block. So that's the other challenge from we really want a place that has a rhythm of building form.
Yeah.
And it's not going to feel like, oh, this was done in 2020, or well, we'd love it if it was done in 2020s, but so that's the other flip side of it.
Yeah.
From an architect's perspective. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All those things are important. I'm going to keep moving here just so we can maybe get through the whole presentation. Let's see. Okay. So quickly about the office market. So I just pulled out these charts from the report, and you know what you see is that the station area hasn't added any new space in the last 10 years. The city has increased its supply by 4.8 million square feet, the market area by 18 million. So it's not from lack of demand. I would argue that it's sort of lack of demand for this location. And you know, you all are familiar with these 2-story buildings that are just adjacent to the station. But again, these buildings, as it turns out, are pretty well occupied. And this is where you're hosting those small PSTS businesses, some of the manufacturing businesses. We were so surprised when we looked at who the tenants were in these buildings and saw some of these big manufacturing companies are in here. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have the business names right at my fingertips. They are in the report if you kind of flip through and look at the office market section. So these are, most of this stuff was built in the 1990s, and despite sort of low rents and relatively older office stock, vacancy rates in the station area are significantly lower than they are for the market area and for the city. So there is demand for office space. And again, sort of speaking to everybody's questions about small businesses and like what they're looking for. This is kind of what I would argue is partially the incubator function that this station area is playing in terms of the economy. The other thing is that in terms of the data that we have in the report, it showed that there were about 11 million square feet of office space in the pipeline right now, just between Santa Clara and San Jose. So that's a big chunk to absorb. And that this new increment in supply is going to take a while to kind of lease up. So that's going to be like the pig moving through the python. And just that overhang in market supply, if it all comes online, which it may or may not, is gonna create a time lag, I think, between when there might be demand for office space and when it would land here in the station area. So that's not to say that it would not come here. It just probably is not the near-term driving use. And it's important to remember that people are saying, oh my God, the sky is falling on the office market, but that's not true. Per se, that the suburban office market in generally in the Bay Area, but every place else is doing better than downtown office markets, and that the South Bay generally is doing better in terms of market performance than San Francisco. The vacancy rates are not low, but they're also not crazy high. There's, again, somewhere around between 14 and 18%. Once you get down closer to 10%, you're almost at market equilibrium. So it's, again, a lot of that is because it's owner occupied office space in the South Bay, but still there's demand. Now, all the big tech companies are retrenching. Right now, they're repositioning, they're laying people off, but we've seen this movie before in the Bay Area. And I think we still have one of the most resilient and robust tech economies in the world. And venture capital is still flowing here. And the fact that the AI industry is focused on San Francisco, we've got life science and biotech in the San Mateo County, and then we have just a really interesting mix of advanced manufacturing in the East Bay. It's not going away. So I feel optimistic about office, but not for the near term. And then the other thing, as my son who works for Apple complains about bitterly, these tech companies are starting to have return to office policies after the first of the year where they're going to tell everybody they've got to be back in the office 5 days a week. So that's also going to sort of, again, cause another shift. So the office market is interesting, but a little bit further out. So not, we don't want to discount it. We don't want to throw it out. We don't want to say it's never going to be there. We just want to anticipate that it might take a while. The industrial market is a little sad.
Sorry, I have a quick question about the office.
Oh yeah,
So,
let me go back to this. Sorry.
there's the Coleman High Line is right there. I know that it's also a really big office. So is there like synergy in office, or does office tend to be very independent? And then kind of a follow-up, do you have any sense for how occupied, Coleman Highland is right now? Like, to give maybe a sense for how popular office space is in that corner?
Yeah,
Compared
again.
to the wider market?
Yeah, such a great question. So I don't have the vacancy rates for the Coleman Highline project right off the top of my head. But when last I looked at that project, it was commanding very high rents. And before the pandemic, it had very low vacancy rates. It was like in the North San Jose market, sort of going from downtown north into the kind of big cluster up towards 237. Coleman Highline was a standout.
I can also help answer that question. The Coleman Highline is fully leased.
Yeah.
And really what we've seen in the market is the tenants are flocking to the best quality spaces.
Yeah.
And they're willing to pay the premium rents, and the Class B and Class C spaces are where a lot of the vacancy is taking place.
Right. So, but we have low vacancies in the station area. And to answer the question about synergy, absolutely there's a synergy on office space. And there's a synergy between housing and office, by the way. So leading with these big housing projects will also help change the profile of this area to make it more attractive as office. I'm actually very optimistic long-term for the station area for office.
Dina?
Yeah.
Dan Undersec. A sentence kind of popped out on me that office users tend to want to walk shorter distance. Transit. You saw that part. I think it's on 61. Do you guys, is that quantitative? Do you have any analysis on that?
Yes, yeah, there is, MTC has data on that. And Robert Cervero, who's one of the kind of leading researchers in the industry on transit and transit-oriented development, also has that. I can get you a reference on, I'll give that to staff.
Right. And does that, we're all, fantasizing about a TOD area.
Mhm.
Would that, and I don't expect you to know this now, but how close do the offices have to be? And a second point to that is, if there's a trolley or transit connector to the airport,
Mhm.
do you have examples of that maybe alleviating that issue?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that the trolley or connector to the airport is
It wouldn't be the airport, it'd be the train.
to the train. Yeah, those are not, unless it's really fast. Now, the technology is also changing really quickly on the kind of trolley, and this is that sort of trolley scale is perfect for these small autonomous vehicles. So I can't really answer that question, partly because I don't know that we have the data that.
Yeah, got it.
So, but I can give you the reference on,
MTC.
you guys are asking such great question. So yeah, but I think this little business park here, is kind of a hidden gem now, because it's, kind of, very, low vacancy rates, and, it's, kind of housing some of your industries that you want to sort of showcase. And then it's a great development site for the future, and it's right close to the station, both stations, the Caltrain and the BART station. So,
There is currently a development proposed for that space to be all housing.
yeah, well,
And so that's my
darn,
fear
wouldn't
is
it be great if we could do office there? But this is why you're doing a plan too, is to try to set the zoning and set the stage so that future opportunities don't get away.
See that, this is Dan again, that's my fear is, and no offense to Berkeley, but Shattuck's going into a bedroom community. Everything's just, the UA, all that stuff getting torn down. Is that this area becomes just, because of people walking to transit.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, that's why I'm saying, and Berkeley has some interesting challenges around office space. That you wouldn't think of for a place that has a world-class university, that I think you all might be better positioned to address. So Berkeley has found it very difficult to compete with downtown Oakland. And so it's really a question, part of the question here is whether or not you can bring some of that secret sauce from the Coleman High Line project more towards Santa Clara, and what would that look like?
Well, what we should also take a look at is the success of the Santa Clara Town Square. What's the project with the Whole Foods and such over there? Santa Clara Square.
Yeah.
Because they do have a large amount of office space there for top tier companies. I know AMD moved from Sunnyvale there. They've got Hitachi Global. Heck, Palo Alto's across the way. It's a ton of office space there. While they do have like housing right next to it.
Yeah.
The amount of people that just walk on over there from those buildings that go to all those restaurants and such is crazy. And I think that really sets it apart from what's going on in Berkeley and such.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's why the Coleman High Line is such a benefit to our city, because it's right next to all this. So
yeah. Well, I think it is what really drove the demand for that giant housing project. Like, students, great, you stay over there by the campus, but we're going to go for those tech workers over here. And that's what you want. So, yeah. So, but the Santa Clara Square project, I know that was coming online when we were working on the Tasman East project, but these are great examples. We'll come back and take another look at those. Any other questions or comments about office?
I guess one of the aspects I'm struggling with, I'm sort of really focusing on the example that you have on the screen. I think what I'm taking away from it is that it's an example of a high demand office facility, and it's based on the fact that it's very low vacancy and it helps these incubator type businesses. However, in looking at it, looking at its potential role in this transit-oriented development station area landscape, it doesn't offer much. It has the same issue that Dan was describing.
Right.
About office workers don't want to walk long distances. And it speaks to the point you described to us earlier about how design guidelines are incredibly important moving forward. So what are I'm just trying to sort of encapsulate all of this with some sort of conclusion. So are we supposed to be thinking of this as moving forward, we want to achieve this type of function, but not necessarily in this particular format?
Right. Yes, you've articulated it so well. Thank you. That's exactly right. If there were not a development proposal for this site, or if that development proposal goes away, then you all have the opportunity to rezone this site for higher density office, for example. And I'm not saying that that's what you should do. I'm saying it's something I've thought about and that I've talked about with WRT over time. Because we do think that it is important to keep the employment momentum going here. Where would you put it? How would you position it? How do you tie it to the transit stations? Again, where does it belong and why? So I think the way I would articulate it is that this is a placeholder. This current office space is a placeholder. And I've heard people say, oh, well, that office space is a complete disaster. Well, it looks not so great. But I think what's really interesting is who's inside the box there. And again, are there ways to also think about making smaller scale incubator spaces or whatnot for the kinds of businesses that are doing well in here today?
Dina, just one last thing I want to say on this is that we've studied areas and cities. Los Gatos is a perfect example where you've got, a cute little downtown, you got all the shops, but you have no offices.
Yeah.
And you've got 40% vacancy. Whereas Campbell does not, as an example, because they've got the towers and offices nearby. So I think, for this body, it's critical that we don't make this a bedroom.
Yeah. Well, and I think doing this even if you mix uses in different buildings, they're not mixed in the building, but in different buildings, you're gonna take much better advantage of the transit opportunity. So I think we should really think about that transit as a powerful catalyst over time. I often caution people to say transit is a market accelerator. It's not a market maker. But in this case, I think it's a pretty unique situation. And again, in my opinion, this station area could be on par with Diridon or not quite at the level of Transbay because you're not in downtown San Francisco, but it's going to be a very important station location because it has so much transit service.
So here's what, this is such a great discussion, you guys, and Dina, this framing is so excellent. But here's what we're going to be faced with, as we go into concept alternatives. do we take a little bit more of a laissez-faire approach, form-based form-based approach where we're not dictating zoning, but maybe we set caps.
You're not dictating use, Jim.
Not dictating use. And we're setting maybe caps, so we don't want to overbuild residential, nor do we want to overbuild office, but we want that perfect mix between the two. Or do we favor office that is in these closer in sites to the station? And so is there a degree of dictating land use and doing some rezoning as a way to guide that? So I think that's going to be a really important debate as we move forward, and we can look at sort of configurations of how is that shaped and look at it in 2 or 3 different ways. And so this is perfect table setting for that conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Honestly, there may not be a right answer. It might be hard to know what the right answer is. So we're all going to struggle with this. Anyway, I want to keep going because I want to be mindful of people's time. So just going to touch on the industrial market. As Jim and the people at WRT and even the city staff know, I'm a huge advocate for industrial lands and retaining industrial land supply. And so I started out this project with the idea that this land is really valuable. We really need to hold on to it. But I did the math, I did the research, I did my research. I'm a data-driven person. And I had to, at the end of the day, conclude that this is like a little vestigial tail end of this much larger industrial agglomeration that I was talking about earlier. And this little sort of vestigial part is really declining. Overall, in the market area, in the city, the amount of industrial space has shrunk. And that's why I put this table in here. I thought it was really interesting, even in the station area. And again, where you look at that Gateway Crossings project is going in, and even where the BART station is going in, I don't know what land use was there before, but I'm guessing it was something sort of industrial, right? So, so you see that there's been a decline in the absolute amount of industrial space. There's been a decline in Santa Clara, and there's been a decline in the market area. This decline does not reflect a lack of demand. The vacancy rates for this space are very low, and the rents are relatively high. Now, what's really interesting about the station areas and what sort of did it for me is that the station area achieves both lower rents and has a much higher vacancy rate than the city or the market area. And that this is a reversal of what the trend was a few years ago. So this is really telling me that despite the fact that the Bay Area is starved for this kind of very bland, plain vanilla industrial space, this location is no longer functioning for the businesses that were the users in here, and new businesses are not finding this location appealing. So kind of to Jim's earlier point, we might not have the that business park that I was just showing you all a minute ago, but our real reservoir of land for redevelopment might really be in this sub-area 1. So breaks my heart, but I think this is something that we also really are need to look at. Now, not all of it needs to go, and not all of it needs to be replaced with just office space. There are various kinds of R&D buildings, as Jim says. We can manage some of this through form, and even if you were doing more of a form-based code, you can still create forms that are more business friendly or more housing friendly. So I do think you can, even with a more form-based approach, you can still you can still put your finger on the scale to some extent.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've actually like biked around these industrial areas quite a bit, trying to get a good feel for what businesses are in there. And it mostly seems to be on the light industrial side, right? Like
Yeah.
robotics, light manufacturing, warehouses. I've seen a lot of like construction related industries, but are literally storing like tiles or
Right,
kitchen cabinets or whatever inside. And
right.
I know in a lot of other countries have actually adopted what they call these like mixed use industrial districts. Japan is probably one of the best examples of this. China's also looked at all of these recently, where it is a mixed use neighborhood. Oftentimes you do have retail and housing in them, but they're primarily industrial focused. And you
Right.
often have high density industrial buildings, like think 4 or 5 stories, warehouses, manufacturing. Life sciences is probably a big use. And like you said, San Mateo's having a life sciences boom, but I do think that if we allow high density industrial in the station area, I do think we can attract some life sciences companies as well. And
Yeah.
I know in the previous meetings, we had some ideas for building like a maker space or a beer
Mhm.
hall or food hall or anything like that. So I think those would also be compatible uses for a mixed use industrial area, since
Right.
those uses tend to have a much higher impact. And if you put those in a traditional residential area, a lot of neighbors may complain, but put it in an industrial area, and I guess
Right.
you'll have a lot less friction. So I do
Yeah.
think that we should think of this industrial space as being more of like an innovation hub, like you do see in Europe, like you see in Japan. Can allow
Right.
housing, you can allow businesses,
Uh-huh.
focus on industrial.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I understand your point clearly, you're saying that we don't have to give up the focus on industrial. We just need to change the building type in order to allow for a vertical or stacked mix of industrial and sort of business type uses. Is that your
Yeah,
point?
correct.
Yeah,
Yes, these
Yeah.
light industrial uses, they are not allowed under traditional commercial or residential zoning.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is not heavy industry. You can stack it, you can go multi-story, and it doesn't
Yeah.
pollute, doesn't have as much of an impact. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have sort of mixed feelings about how you handle that in a plan context because it's so untested in the market. But I know I was in Vancouver last summer, or maybe 2 summers ago. I have family there, so I get to go there pretty often. This is Vancouver, BC. And they're doing a lot of really interesting reuse in their older industrial areas with buildings that are mixed use in this way, where they're doing this kind of prototyping. I don't want to call it maker space because I think it's really more small scale manufacturing and not the kind of person that we're thinking of who's making jewelry or messenger bags or something like that, but they're making maybe prototyping parts or doing other kinds of things. So I do think there is a movement in that direction. I agree.
Dina, one last thing, I'm a broken record every one of these meetings, but it's a great spot for music, because you're away from, the quad, the houses.
Uh-huh.
That for, late night venues, which we don't have. in the
Uh-huh.
South
Uh-huh.
Bay.
Uh-huh.
So, and I'll speak a little bit historically to this. So that was the FMC plant for the entire Coleman Highline complex, all the way down to the 17. And that was heavy industrial, and a lot of the light industrial that's around,
Uh-huh.
what were kind of feeder companies to that, when FMC left, folded on over, turned into other things, which is why we've got this kind of smattering of light industrial there. I do feel like, and the reason why that was there is multimodal, right between the,
Yeah.
highway, rail,
Right.
and air access there.
Right.
Because of the the noise requirements that are on the
Yeah.
other side of Coleman, I do
Right.
feel like there is still a place for industrial there, as well as
Uh-huh.
anything that does have kind of a need for that noise space. Music venues, clubs, stuff like that. And so creating a space that might be able to utilize that light industrial, that makerspace concept, speaking as a member of the Cultural Commission, having something that is arts focused, but also industrial and creation on that would be a
Mhm.
fantastic use for that, since we do have the noise requirements there that may drive away,
Mhm.
say, office space or residential space.
Uh-huh.
So looking at kind of a gradation as a
Uh-huh.
means of blocking
Interesting.
noise might be
Yeah.
interesting for that
Yeah,
space.
yeah, so we'll just put another noisy use in there. Are you familiar with the Funk Zone in Santa Barbara?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. I wrote it down. Good idea. We'll talk about that later, Jim. Okay, hotel market, again, this is a use that's sort of in play. The blue line here is the station area. So the city and the station area, I just picked occupancy rates as the one indicator. There are several more tables and charts around the hotel market in the report, but I think this one adequately tells the story that the area has not recovered. The station area, the city, the market area were all kind of moving together. And then in 2019 and then 2020, huge drop, of course, we all know. And then this area has struggled to recover. So we'll look at the transient occupancy tax, which is sort of another indicator of hotel performance in a moment. That said, there are, as I understand it, 3 proposals for new hotels in the station area that would result in about 800 new rooms coming online in the next 3 or 4 years. So if those all get built, then you're going to have more supply here. And the niche or market segment for the station area appears to be this sort of mid-level concept. The most successful hotels, and perhaps one of the reasons why the market area is doing better now than the other areas, is because they have more luxury product, and that's who's traveling right now and really out and about. Are people who are traveling for business or looking for more of a high-end experience. Now you'll notice that this data ends in 2023. We did not account for Beyonce and Taylor Swift. So, and we all know that they had a tremendous economic impact. So I'll be curious to look at what this trend looks like at the end of 2024 when you've had these huge events at Levi's Stadium. But unless anybody has any more to say about hotels, I'm going to move on. Nope. Okay. So just to sum up on the real estate opportunities, and again, I've pretty much we've pretty much gone through all these findings, but the multifamily housing is the strongest near to midterm market segment. And I know someone was saying, well, the staff is really interested in feasibility. And if you were to go in and do a pro forma on any of these buildings today, with today's inputs, they would not pencil, but that doesn't mean they're not going to get built, and they're not going to get built in the next 3 to 5 years. So I wouldn't worry about the difference between sort of what shows up as feasible on a pro forma today and what I think is coming. And I think multifamily is that. Hotel demand, I think that's going to likely level off after you get these new 3 projects built. And then this will probably parallel what happens with the office market. So to the earlier point about the fact that, we should be thinking more about something that's a hybrid between office and that very sad industrial concrete tilt-up single-story stuff that we were just looking at. There are a myriad of office products that are sort of in the middle here. And the way that CoStar, the database we work with, categorizes R&D, research and development space, other kinds of spaces that are sort of somewhere between office and where you're doing prototyping is something that we can really play around with. And I think that was one of your points about what's going on in Europe and Asia, and then what Jim is saying about focusing on design guidelines that kind of facilitate a wider range of uses than just thinking about office. But I think generally employment, we can just call this employment uses, are still going to be very viable at this location. In the long term, it may take longer for this to all come together, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be planning for it today. And then finally, I think retail is going to play a modest role in the station area's transition. And when I say modest, I'm saying in terms of the amount of square footage that it will occupy. I don't mean modest in terms of what it's going to mean in terms of placemaking and sort of reflecting the character and sort of vibe, if you will, of the place. In that way, retail will play an outsized role. It'll be very important, but that's why we have to be really strategic about it. So I think from this discussion, you all probably understand this is what I would be concluding, but if any of you have any more questions about any of these categories.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Would entertainment be classified with retail or more similar to like office? Where would you classify that?
I'm sorry, say that again. Which use would be classified as retail or?
Like entertainment?
Entertainment, yes, it's both. Sometimes it falls under retail and sometimes it has its own food service and accommodation. If you're thinking in terms of business codes, food service and accommodation is treated separately from retail. But I'm using retail here in a broader sense and including food service and accommodation, which is restaurants, other kinds of, cafes, all the fast food kinds of places. And then also bars, brew pubs, you could put the music venues that would also serve alcohol in the same category. So we could change this. I'm just writing this down because you guys are making good points. We could change office to employment uses as we go forward, and then this sort of retail to something that's a broader category of use.
Yeah, and one more thing.
Yeah.
A pretty underrated sector that people don't really talk about, but is actually a growing market in many big cities is short-term rentals. So kind of falls between hotels and multifamily housing, but there's people who literally want a place to rent for like a month, 2 months.
Yeah.
I know like many cities have actually passed Airbnb regulations and it's difficult to like get short-term rentals built, but bottom line is that demand for such types of housing has actually gone up. Sometimes people just want 2-month lease because they're doing an internship. Maybe they're visiting for a long time. Maybe they want a temporary place to stay before they move to a more permanent apartment. And I feel that allowing short-term rentals with few restrictions or with very limited restrictions, at least within station area, would be another good opportunity to maybe create new projects that pencil out. Like people don't really talk about STRs, but I do think that it's an underrated, little talked about portion of the market that we should consider.
That's a really interesting point. Again, that's a decision that a property owner would have to make, but it is something that the city could make a policy to support. I know that in the North San Jose area where they were building a lot of new housing in that big run up, say 2015, 16, 17, a lot of that stuff was actually being master leased by the companies, and then by the employers in the area, and then they were using it as short-term rentals. I know Microsoft does this in Redmond, Washington. So I think what you're saying is it should be up to the property owner who, if they own an apartment building, they should be able to do that, and it should not be prohibited with these short-term rental policies that are trying to fight the conversion of, single family homes and apartments and other kinds of places to accommodate tourists and stuff like that. But in this context, this might be a good policy.
Yeah, I mean, just create a level playing field. I know Airbnb STRs are pretty heavily regulated in the rest of the city. We shouldn't have those regulations in the station area, so property owners can decide whether they want long-term or short-term leases. And I really think that'll fill a pretty huge untapped sector of the market, especially given the proximity to the train station. A lot of people want STRs. They also value access to transit, proximity to the university, to other like job centers. I feel this would be a great place for that.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, thanks. That's a great point.
Dina, I had a question. I'm going to go way back to 14.
Let me go back to that slide.
So it's housing tenure and housing cost burden. Is there, okay, most people call it east-west, but it could be north-south, where the tracks are the divider.
Yeah.
Is there one side that's more cost burden on housing-related costs than the other?
Well, right now, there's basically no housing in that east side or that north side or whatever you call that. There's just, so all of the houses are in the area around Santa Clara University and then going west.
Got it.
So there is no east-west right now on the housing.
Okay. Got
Although
it.
that's
Right.
gonna change any minute now with all the gateway crossings coming online.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah, but we'll pick that up in the next, you know, as it begins to be occupied, it'll be picked up and it'll certainly be captured in the 2030 census.
But that came out in the grant, the grant application for the trolley.
Uh-huh,
One side was more cost burden.
uh-huh,
And I think they're anticipating a higher cost on the east side.
yeah, I
All
don't.
right, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's something, if you needed that data, we have it all by the block groups, so we could break it out. You could just send a request through staff and we could just send you a table.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Hey, Dina, on
Yeah.
retail,
yeah,
does food and beverage, like restaurants, cafes, et cetera, is that sort of a category apart? Because what we're seeing in some other downtowns is that is doing quite well.
Yeah, no, it's
sort of-
doing
It's
great.
sort of
That's-
pushing out
Yeah.
the, traditional retail. So,
Uh-huh.
that demand for brick and mortar retail is
Uh-huh.
really tight and it's shrinking, but the dining is quite robust. So
Uh-huh.
is that something that we can kind of use to our advantage here to create
Yeah.
these places
Yeah.
of synergy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the challenge for me is that the way that these things are defined across the different data sets that we work with. So in CoStar retail, and so that's the real estate database that we're working with. Retail includes food and beverage and restaurants. In the North American industrial classifications, which is the official way that we segment in economies by industry sector, that calls out food and beverage separately from retail trade. In the sales tax data that the city has but is confidential, so we didn't get it, food and beverage is covered under retail sales tax. So it's really, this is part of the definitional problem. So not to bore you all with data, but so the answer to your question, Jim, is yes, food and beverage would be considered under retail under certain definitions. And certainly going forward and looking at demand, we would be looking at it from the perspective of including food and beverage. And I think that's what the gentleman earlier was saying, is that by calling it retail and not expanding this definition, it seems to be eliminating or pushing out or not taking into account food and beverage. So I think this is partly just a nomenclature thing. And a little bit real estate speak.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So just again, the city had some questions for us about well, what about, so we have 4 of those. Well, what about what does this area contribute in retail sales? What about transient occupancy tax? What about affordable housing? And what about small business? So we analyze these to the best of our ability. And as you'll see, for example, on the sales tax data, all we could get was published data that is published at the city level. In order to look more at what the station area is contributing to the city now in terms of retail sales tax, we would have to work with the city and their sales tax provider to get that information. And it might all be suppressed and confidential because Costco is so big and they're the single, they're a single business in their business category, which is general merchandise. So we might not be able to report that anyway because it would be suppressed. So we only have the city's trends, the city's retail sales trends. And what you see here is that by the end of 2023, that the sales tax were maybe not, this is a peak in 2019, but the data is not completely comparable because the city shifted its reporting methods. So if we just even look at just the last couple of years, you can see that it's on the upward swing, which is a good sign, and that it is, you know, again, well above this, you know, this where it was before. So it settled, but once this accounting change came in, it had sort of this one-time peak, and then it sort of went back and was more normalized. But you can see that it's still going on the upward trend. So the largest growth in sales tax revenues between 2015 and 2022 came from specific business types, and most of these categories are represented in the stationery. So it's really interesting. They're motor vehicles and parts dealers, which there is a bunch of that in the stationery, selling, doing auto repair, selling cars, selling auto parts. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I'm always cautioning cities to really think about just redeveloping these areas, is because there are a lot of businesses in these industrial areas that do serve your households. They're the places that you go to get your car repaired. They're the places that you go to buy your kitchen cabinets, all those kinds of things. And if you move them all out of the city, there is a cost to your residents. But it's a real tension between what the market is doing and what the businesses are signaling to the city about who wants to stay and who wants to leave. And it was really interesting about the history of FMC and how it's influenced that whole big industrial area going to the north of where the core of FMC used to be, as I understand it. So anyway, so that's just something to keep in mind in terms of these sales tax revenues, is that the station area probably contributes significantly to the city's current fiscal health. Now, maybe the revenue that the city gets from retail sales tax today, as over time the city the property redevelops, there could be enough property tax incremental increase in value to replace this sales tax revenue. It's very likely. We did a big fiscal impact analysis for an industrial area in San Carlos. That's actually kind of similar to this. Actually, it's industrial spaces performing better than yours is. And they don't generate very much sales tax revenue from their area, but the bump in property tax was really significant. And even when they looked at all the costs that they thought would, and the Public Works Department made us calculate line item by line item on road maintenance and all these kinds of things, the increase, the huge incremental increase in property tax was significant. And so that would be a case here. So on the one hand, you might be giving up sales tax, but on the other hand, you're gaining property tax, and property tax is actually more stable. You can see retail sales tax is volatile. It very much trends with the economy.
And Dina, quick question on this.
Yeah.
Like, I fully recognize you might not have like the breakdown on this, but like for the upward swing, do you think it's more the increase in the number of transactions, or is it inflation that's attributing to the tax revenue?
It's probably some of both. These are not inflation adjusted numbers. But it's probably some of both.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on the transient occupancy tax, and
I had a question too about the sales tax. You mentioned like sales tax might go down, and you might, if you had redevelopment, because then you'd have property tax would jump. But because of California's Prop 13, right? Once you've done a redevelopment, generally the property value, tax value goes up lower than inflation. Whereas, you know, retail, I mean, costs go up at least inflation, right? That's what the cost is. So is there a trade-off there? Is it like where sales tax revenue would track inflation typically versus, property tax kind of being artificially low over
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to trend that over time and look at it as a discounted cash flow, but it's a stable source of, it might not be increasing over time with inflation, but if you factor in, let me see if I can figure out the best way to articulate this. If you factor in, first of all, there will be incremental increases, and then you would have to trend that against what you think the inflation term would be to see when you think that the increase in inflation on your costs to maintain your services and so your city, your streets and all that kind of stuff would finally cross the curve of your increase in property tax values. And I don't think that that's the issue now. Would sales tax, I think the incremental difference in the amount of sales tax you're generating out of here and the what would happen with the property tax is significant. I'm not articulating this very well. I'm really sorry, but because of the significant amount of increase in property tax, it probably accounts for that inflationary adjusted sales tax.
Yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to understand like how much we're getting in sales tax from the area versus how much the property values would go up, because it probably depends on depends on the jump. Like I recognize there's a crossover. I've always heard that like that's one of the challenges San Jose has had with their budget is that because of all the homes that they don't get a lot of budget, money because they don't have enough retail or income from businesses.
Yeah.
They're kind of suffering because they from funding traditionally.
Yeah, well, some of that is because they built out very low density. So much of San Jose is built out at a low density. It's not, and we've looked at this pretty closely, and it's, San Jose's amount of retail space per capita is actually not that much lower than anybody else's. I think it's that they had very low property tax rates when Prop 13 locked in. And they didn't have a lot of retail activity, but they now have Valley Fair Mall and other malls, and they've managed to add incrementally a lot of retail space. So I think that they're in a structural deficit for a whole myriad of reasons that are not just about housing versus industrial. And they've given up a bunch of industrial space to housing. So I think the story is way more complicated than that. I know, and people have tried to unpack that San Jose, like what is that structural issue? And it's really hard to tease apart.
I think it's because a lot of the properties are very small and the owners have owned them for a very long time. So they have a very low tax basis and they don't trade very often.
Exactly.
So when they do, you get that step up in basis at a current market value, but it's rare and it's hard to track. And a lot of these are users who have owned their business in the building for 30 years. And so to like tag a straight line to all those properties in one bucket is a challenge.
Yeah.
And then with the properties in this area, so many of them really on the northern side of Coleman are very small, and the reality of redeveloping those is going to be a major challenge.
Yeah.
So just economically. So I think just keeping that in mind that they may be there to stay for a while unless some developer can figure out a complicated assemblage.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. Now we have been looking at property tax generating activity in Union City in their industrial areas, and their industrial areas are actually way more robust than this area. Their manufacturing stuff, I mean, they still have a pretty big food manufacturing sector there. And they are making hospital equipment, and they're making lighting fixtures. Like they're really manufacturing stuff in Union City still. And on a per acre basis, their industrial land yield is like double what housing is. Now, in terms of total property tax revenue for the entire city, housing generates more because the industrial lands only represent 15% of the city's total acreage, I think something like that. But on a per acre basis, it's pretty high. And the other thing that's really interesting about that is that all the equipment inside those buildings are accounted for in the property tax. So every time, if you have a manufacturing industry or even a tech industry of some sort that is upgrading equipment, that then that unsecured property also helps to lift your property tax revenues. So there are a lot of reasons to like robust industrial space, but I think the other thing that San Jose is struggling with is they don't have a lot of that kind of robust manufacturing going on anymore either. So even the underlying history of San Jose's economy works against them getting a high value yield off their industrial properties. Not to veer off into a way non sequitur topic here, but it obviously is something that's interesting. Just to move on to transient occupancy tax, as I was saying earlier, the transient occupancy tax, as you all know, is charged to a hotel user for every night they stay. And so the city's hotel occupancy tax, the TOT, is another good source of funding for Santa Clara, particularly because people do come and stay in hotels all over town when there's a big event at Levi's Stadium. So you can see that this again really peaked. Again, there's the same data reporting issue, but now it's slowly creeping its way back up. So it's coming along. And again, I think these trends are going to continue as long as the economy remains strong. And then the last two issues here are, I would say, more policy issues than they are kind of reflections of real estate or economic issues. One is this question about affordable housing and sort of what role does affordable housing play in the station area? And I will editorialize a little bit here by saying that transit connectivity is a really important asset for people who are seeking housing affordability. And the reason for this is if you live in a place that has robust transit that serves a lot of different activity concentrations, and by that I mean both employment centers, but also if you take Caltrain into San Francisco, you can go to the movie theater, the symphony, the ballet, the Asian Art Museum, any kind of, a baseball game, a myriad of kinds of cultural activities that people also want to engage in. So if you live near robust transit that can get you to some of those activity centers, you don't need to own a car, or your household can own one fewer car. And that's a huge cost savings to households. So when we think about from a policy standpoint, the importance of affordable housing, I would argue that it's almost more important to think about affordable housing near transit than it is any place else in your city, because you amplify the benefit of affordable housing by reducing people's transportation costs. And so what's interesting to me is that the city, in doing its most recent housing element, has not put any of your your housing element sites in the station area. And it could be just because the sites are complicated. They're now mostly industrial sites. They're not all well connected. So I could see why that policy decision was made. It's a rational policy decision, but what role affordable housing should or could play in this area is an interesting one. And so the city has several different ways of achieving a goal of maybe targeting affordable housing activity into this area, which are that the city does own land in this area, And if the city were to want to move its police station, for example, and I know this building is relatively new and no one's like, jumping up and down to move it, but if that were to happen in the future, the city would have to first offer this site to a qualified affordable housing developer. That's required through the State Surplus Lands Act. And so that's something to consider as to what the disposition process would be for that site and how much affordability you could get out of it. The second is that the city already has an inclusionary requirement for new market rate development. So for projects that are bigger than 10 units, which I think most of these projects would be in this area, 15% of the units have to be set aside for lower income households. So you'll get some number of units there. Inclusionary housing is not always the most effective policy vehicle, particularly for producing these very low income units, because they create a big cost burden for the developers. But they are a good mechanism for creating moderate income. So you could adjust your inclusionary housing policy a little bit to also incorporate housing units that are targeted to people in the 80% of area median income range. So that's one thing you could do. And then finally, the city does have a housing impact fee that you charge. And another potential policy would be to prioritize projects, and again, over time, that would want to locate in the station area, as opposed to putting housing other places. Now, that's not to say that putting housing on El Camino is a bad idea. It's a good idea because El Camino also has a lot of transit service, but prioritizing the money that the city has to leverage affordable housing to transit-oriented locations, which could be multiple places in the city, not just the study area, is something to consider. So let's see, so that's it. And then, yeah, we have the small business policy. So again, this was really interesting that the majority of businesses in the station area, like 98% of them, are small businesses, but the city's small business programs may or may not be well targeted or well suited to the kinds of businesses. You have readjusted your business license taxes so that smaller businesses pay lower taxes. You charge lower power rates to small businesses. So those are kind of interesting. And I don't know how powerful they have been as incentives to small businesses. And then the kind of third big focus has been on these worker cooperative initiatives. And I don't know that those kinds of businesses have mostly been focused on restaurants and bakeries and businesses like that are more serving households than they are like small startup businesses or anything like that. So I don't know how much further the city's interested in going in this, but certainly when we get to the implementation section of the plan, we can talk a little bit more about either adding programs, tweaking programs, thinking about other ways to incorporate incentives for small business. So we just thought in reviewing, and really this is all we did, was in reviewing the city's current programs, we're not sure how well they align, particularly with the professional, scientific, and technical services. And this is where there are a lot of small businesses in the study area. And then finally, actually we're over time. So I apologize for keeping you, but I feel like we've had such a great discussion. This really is what I was saying earlier to your questions around the retail and how do we really evolve the space. And this is where, again, Jim chiming in on some of this stuff and the working with WRT is so great, because having a specific plan in place is actually in and of itself a game changer. And I know that might sound like, really, how can that be? It's just a plan, doesn't it just sit on the shelf? But what it actually does is it creates more certainty for the developers, and it often also creates an easier path to getting approvals. And for developers, the market risk or the entitlement risk that's involved in going in and trying to propose a project that might be controversial is very expensive and can cost them a lot of money. So just having a plan in place that has clearly stated goals, that has clearly laid out rules, and that gives a clear vision for how to move forward, decreases the cost of the developers' projects, and they really like having the plan in place. So you guys are taking an important first step for sending these positive market signals. The second thing is really looking at placemaking and design standards, and we really talked about that a lot when we had the discussion around the retail space. But again, this is incredibly valuable, and we computed, for example, the value of that plaza sort of park that could be programmed in downtown Fargo. And it had an enormous impact on rents, but both for housing and for office. They have a lot of office space in downtown Fargo. And then also it really helped to rejuvenate the retail sector in the area, because like an ice cream store opened up across the street from that place. And it's a huge thing for people to take their kids for ice cream. And in Fargo, I kid you not, they eat ice cream 12 months a year. I wouldn't eat it from like October to June there, but whatever, they're more robust than I am. But they say that really did help the small businesses there. And then finally, being really strategic about where public investments are made in infrastructure and public spaces. And I think one of the mistakes we often make in doing specific plans is that we draw these beautiful plans with beautiful street trees and really cool stuff everywhere, and we don't do enough thinking about phasing and prioritizing. And I think really looking at how to phase and prioritize so that we're really leveraging these investments so that there is real synergy between the public and private investment is going to be essential. The public sector is in the long run going to be a small player in this. The private sector is going to invest way more money, but sometimes that first in money from the public sector invested strategically is really what again unlocks the opportunity. So I'm sure you all have heard this before, but I just want to underscore these things because these are mantras and they're proven, and I have all kinds of data to back up any one of these things if you all want to sit here for a couple of more hours. So with that, I'm gonna ask you now, I can see you. Presumably you can see me. If there are any more questions or points or things that you want me to kind of put into the hopper for consideration before we sign off.
Thank you, Dina, for the presentation and the great conversation with the group. Are there any questions from the members, additional to what we already discussed before I open it to public? Seeing none, I'm going to open this up to public comments. So if you have any questions, you may come up to the podium, or if you're online, you can raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. So I think that's all we have tonight. So yeah, thank you, Dina.
Thank you. It was you guys asked such great, thoughtful questions. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Looking forward to seeing updates based on the conversation.
Yeah, and thanks, Dina. As I said before, this is really great table setting for the next phase that we're going to enter into as we get into exploring the concept. So I really appreciate your work on this, and I agree, great questions from the task force and good discussion tonight. I'm excited.
Yeah, and we'll be back when you start to talk about implementation, but we'll be working with WRT on the alternatives.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Great
Take
job.
care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, our next item is actually public presentations. So if there's any items that's not on the agenda that anyone on a task force, not on a task force would like to address, raise your hand, come to the podium, raise your hand online, any of those things. I mean, you can wave in my face. But anything from anyone? Seeing
Yeah,
none?
I have a quick, I just want to give a quick report out from the CWG for Santa Clara Station. So there's been some recent changes and updates to the station. Should be looked at. VTA is considering a bunch of cost saving measures between the various stations. So there's a new plan. I think you can go back now, and I think they're now recording the CWGs. So if you're interested in watching it, you can go and watch the last couple of ones. I think it's December 6th. I have to go check my notes. They'll be presenting, I think, to the VTA board.
There's a virtual project design update for the public on December 2nd.
That's it.
Virtually, and on the 4th in person.
The December 2nd one is sold
Wait,
out. It's already.
It's sold out?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. We'll have to go let VTA know because I'm not sure how you sell out a Zoom.
The in-person one is at the San Jose Chamber of Commerce.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you for that report. Anything else?
Yeah,
from the
it's,
members?
I just had a question. Yeah, so the BART station, so the VTA BART station, they have community meetings. They're looking at the design, and then they're looking at some like different changes. Like, I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but construction is going to be starting. It was actually already started on the facilities for getting ready for doing the tunnel boring and all that. So they're actively, doing work on the construction site. They've leveled it, making progress, and I think I took notes, but I don't have them, I'll pull them up, but it'll be starting soon for actual construction. Like they're actually making that go. So if you live in that area, expect that you'll start seeing some signs of construction more and more soon. Yeah. Yeah, and all the meetings are open to the public. So I do encourage people to go to the future meetings and look for announcements. Maybe the city can help send stuff out to the station task force members if they want to join when those meetings happen.
Sounds like they restarted and it's like actually more frequent now than before. So it would be really good for members to actually participate in those meetings. Cool. All right, last thing I have is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second. Those who are in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we're adjourned. Thank you.